I'm Connor Rogers from NBC Sports alongside NBC Sports Big Ten analyst Joshua Perry. And today we are going over the Big Ten top 10, the best draft eligible prospects that are playing in the Big Ten conference. So let's jump right in, take a look. No surprise to see Marvin Harrison Jr. at the top for me. I think, Joshua, I think that's a pretty chalk pick. But what is surface level? What is something that stood out to you when you saw this list?
Yeah, I think a lot of the conversation for a lot of people has been about the running backs in the Big Ten Conference and how good that group is. And you start to look at this list, and I think part of it truly is where some of the players are and how good other positions are in this conference. The other part about it is probably the way that the NFL ends up viewing the analysis part of the running back position. But you'd have thought there might have been, two or three or maybe even four guys up there, and that's not necessarily the case. So I think once we kind of go through the list and we get to that running back position, there will be a good discussion about, where these guys fit in terms of being an NFL prospect. But outside of that, man, I think it was a pretty daggone good list. And yes, chalk at number one for Marv.
We will get to those running backs because three of my top four in the entire country for the draft are out of the Big Ten. But like you said, with the position becoming, unfortunately, I don't want to say totally devalued, but not seeing as many first rounders as we used to, that does impact them in the rankings. So I think what I want to ask you is, because you covered this conference in depth, so you get to see the underclassmen, the guys that aren't necessarily in the draft spotlight. I have not seen a prospect like Marvin Harrison Jr. since Jamar Chase, and I think the difference is Marvin Harrison Jr. is even bigger, which gives him an edge. He's so technically refined for a guy that at that age, we've seen him dominate already. What do you think makes him so special, not just heading to the NFL level, but as he kind of has his encore at Ohio State?
I mean, you mentioned the physical tools and capabilities. I think it starts there, right? Like you're looking at a guy who physically, I don't know if you could build a better looking wide receiver. He's got super long arms, but he's also got a long torso. And so when you're dealing with the taller receiver, that means he does have a lower center of gravity, so he can change directions, but he still has that elite level length that people desire. He's also a really hard worker. And you talk to anybody around the Ohio State program, and they'll let you know that they almost had to cut him off from getting extra work in unless he would bring one of his teammates with him. And I think that really stands out for a guy who's going to be a first-round pick. So certainly the game is not complete. I think one place where he can really improve is a place where some people might see it as a strength just because of how physically imposing he is. I don't think his releases are great. I don't think he creates enough separation in the beginning of his route. It's just so, the fact that he's so good at contested catches and he can use his length at the end of the route where he starts to break away. But certainly whoever drafts him is going to get a guy who could be a generational wide receiver in the league.
I like that you brought up the work ethic because it blew my mind watching him run block on tape. Not just you get all the stats and all the highlights, and then you see him actually able to block a little bit down the field as well. He's a complete player. And this is a good time to talk about his teammate that also made the top 10. If Marvin Harrison Jr. wasn't such a superstar, Emeka Egbuka, his other running mate in the wide receiver core, might get even more love. He comes in at number 7. I watch him and I see a player in terms of the build and the style, notably the routes and the polish, like Keenan Allen. That's what I think of when I see Emeka. But he's got an absolute impressive breakaway speed as well for the position. He does not get the attention he deserves right now, Joshua, because of how good Marvin Harrison Jr. is on this offense.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the breakaway speed. It's the thing that stands out to me when I watch him run routes, especially on the deep route. He can create separation late. He can run away from guys. Catch and run is really good for him. Ohio State also started utilizing him a little bit in the jet sweep game as well. And I think that's a testament to both his speed, but also his build a little bit there too. Certainly not going to be as flashy as maybe other prospects out there, but he is a guy who has been consistently productive and somebody who's extremely reliable. And again, you start to add in some of the physical capabilities. He's really good. And it speaks to, I think, a tradition now too, that we started to see from the Ohio State wide receiver room. They're going to have guys every single year. That they're going to be well coached. And quite frankly, these are guys that pan out. They get to the NFL and they're ready to play.
Absolutely. There's not much transition period. I know covering closely the New York Jets here in New York, seeing it from Garrett Wilson, and Chris Olave gave him a good run for his money for Offensive Rookie of the Year as well. So it's insane. How about the Penn State trio, right? When you start talking about that group, it starts with Olu Fashanu because he's a guy that if he declared last year, he might have been the first tackle taken. It would have been really interesting with him in Paris. But the bottom line was he could have been a top 10 pick. He opts to go back to school. They just don't make a lot of guys this physically gifted, Joshua.
And I think that's the biggest thing when you're evaluating offensive linemen, even in the college game, when we start breaking down games and everybody wonders, where's the biggest difference when a Big Ten team's playing a MAC team or when an FBS team's playing an FCS team? It's in the trenches every single time, because you won't find players that look like Olu basically anywhere. So yes, the way that he's built, definitely an advantage for him. I think it was the right decision for him to come back, though. He is a guy who has not started a ton of games, and so those game reps, I think, are invaluable. He is a guy who still has to round out his game and his technique, and I think can prove that he can be more of a stalwart when it comes to pass protection, become a little bit more fluid in that run game. And so this is going to be a fun year, because I think the sky is the limit for a guy like him. Obviously somebody who's going to be coveted, but I want the conversation to evolve by the end of this season from just being about how toolsy he is to about the fact that he's going to be a really good player at the end of the year.
Unfortunately, he gets to practice against another player on this list in Chop Robinson. I mean, you know a thing or two about rushing the passer in this conference as well. And when you look at Chop, I see really powerful hands. I see the ability to win the outside, good flexibility. But the most notable thing that stood out to me, Joshua, is that he plays with really, really good leverage. And it feels like these two will only make each other better.
It's going to be great competition back and forth for those guys. You love to have somebody that caliber that you can line up against one another in practice. But I agree with all the things you said. His bull rush, you can see the power there, but he can also transition that power into speed. He can transition his speed into power. So he's got that combination going for him. I like the bend, maybe not the most bendy guy, but certainly has really good flexibility. The thing that stood out to me was when I started watching some of his run cut-ups, he plays with a great base in the run game. And he's a guy who always tries to find his shoulders square to the line of scrimmage. Like, he doesn't want to be off balance when it comes to making plays at the point of attack in the run game. And when you have a guy of his ability, a lot of these dudes, all they want to do is chase a quarterback around, and they don't care about the little things when it comes to being a total football player. Really stood out to me that not only is he a guy who works on developing his pass rush game, but he cares about being a good factor in the run game as well.
I'm with you all the way. So I think it's time we have this running back conversation. The only guy that made the list, the actual top 10, of course, is Trevion Henderson, who it's been kind of two tails for him. I watched the freshman year tape and I see special, truly special speed, the special ability to create, make guys miss, run through players, and then dealing with what seems like significant injury last year, a guy that couldn't create as much, couldn't find his own yards, and just looked a step slower. But I'm betting on the bounce back this year. I'm betting on the potential because, like you said, in this conference, you can make an argument for Blake Corum, a really, really good player, Braylon Allen, and we can get to those honorable mentions soon. But what do you expect from Henderson this year, assuming his health bill is clean?
Yeah, it should be a bounce back. And it was a lot of an health issue last year. And people, he didn't want to make excuses about it. I don't think the coaching staff wanted to give him an excuse. But when you get down to brass tacks, he just wasn't himself. That 2021 tape you're talking about, it's ridiculous. I mean, he was a guy who could go from playing the tempo game of trying to find where the cutback seam was to hitting top speed once he put his foot in the ground. It's absolutely amazing to watch that transition. For a young player, he displayed really good ball skills out of the backfield. It was great to see that. It just wasn't consistent last year, and a lot of it due to injury. So I think this is a big prove it year. It's big for him to go out there and show people that freshman year wasn't a fluke. This is who I really am. I'm totally healthy, and I can go out there and stand out in a running back group in the Big Ten Conference where it's going to be hard to stand out.
All right, so maybe who's a guy maybe in a month now you're taking away from the honorable mention list at this moment and saying, I told you so. I told you you'd update that top 10, and this guy would find his way in.
Donovan Edwards to me, and I know Blake Corum gets a ton of that conversation at Michigan, and he deserves it. Blake Corum, he's got that low compact build. He's very physical, runs through tackles, finds his way into space. I just don't know if his top end gives me what Donovan Edwards does. The way that Donovan's able to run away from guys is what stands out to me a ton. His ability to catch the football out of the backfield, I think, is the best of any of the running backs in the Big Ten Conference. Where he has struggled is the fact that he has been dinged up, and it's been a little bit up and down. Whereas Blake Corum has been the guy who's been able to be that workhorse, of course, until he got hurt against Illinois a year ago. But it's going to be tough for Michigan trying to figure out how they're going to split the pill. Like, what's the rotation going to be? Because you have two really, really special backs, but Donovan just has shown kind of that flash and that pop that you see from some of those more rare playmakers and his ability to be explosive. And I think that's a differentiator for me.
I know we kicked off this combo saying maybe the NFL doesn't value that position, but a player that can be used, or it was used the same way Donovan can be used, Jahmyr Gibbs, he just went in the top 15 of the draft. So when you look at it like that, the guys that can catch the ball, that can flex out to the slot and have big playability, the league still values them. So, all right, of course, for all of Joshua's work, you could see him on NBC's Big Ten coverage every Saturday. He's all over this conference. My draft work on NBC Sports. For Joshua, for Connor, we'll talk to you soon.